Have you ever wondered what it would be like to experience the most profound moment of your life over and over again? To feel that rush of overwhelming love, that perfect terror, that complete transformation that comes with becoming a parent, not once, but every single year. For most people, childbirth is a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. For Elena Rodriguez, it became an annual nightmare that would challenge everything she thought she knew about motherhood, memory, and the very nature of existence itself. The first time Elena gave birth to Sophie, it was March 15, 2019. The labor lasted 14 hours, her husband Miguel, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, as their daughter fought her way into the world. When the doctor placed the squirming, perfect baby on Elena's chest, she felt something shift in the deepest part of her soul. A love so fierce and immediate, it was almost violent in its intensity. Sophie was born at 3:47 a.m., weighing exactly 6 pounds 2 ounces. She had Elena's dark hair and Miguel's gentle brown eyes, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Elena's thumb, Elena knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same. What Elena didn't know was how literally true that would turn out to be. The second time Elena gave birth to Sophie, it was March 15, 2020. Elena woke up on the morning of March 14, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back, the same restless energy that had preceded Sophie's birth exactly 1 year earlier. But Sophie was sleeping peacefully in her crib down the hall, a healthy, happy 1-year-old who had been walking for 3 months and was just beginning to say mama and dada with delighted clarity. The contractions started at 2:15 p.m., exactly as they had the year before. Miguel, Elena called from the bathroom, where she was gripping the sink as another wave of pain rolled through her body. Something's wrong. I think I'm in labor. Miguel found her doubled over, her face pale with shock and confusion. That's impossible, Elena. Sophie's right here. You can't be pregnant again. We've been careful, and you haven't shown any signs. But when they rushed to the hospital, the ultrasound showed what appeared to be a full-term baby, positioned exactly as Sophie had been a year earlier. The doctors were baffled. Elena's medical records showed no indication of a second pregnancy. She hadn't gained weight, hadn't experienced morning sickness, hadn't felt the baby moving. Yet there on the monitor was the unmistakable image of a child ready to be born. The labor progressed exactly as it had the year before. 14 hours of increasing intensity, Miguel holding her hand, the same encouraging words from the same nurse who swore she remembered Elena from Sophie's birth, but couldn't explain why Elena was back in the same condition. At 3:47 a.m. on March 15, 2020, Elena gave birth to Sophie again. The baby was identical in every way, same weight, same dark hair, same brown eyes, same perfect little fingers that wrapped around Elena's thumb with the same trusting strength. But this Sophie disappeared the moment Elena closed her eyes, leaving her holding nothing but air and the fading memory of impossible warmth. When Elena opened her eyes, she was back in her own bed, and it was morning. Sophie saw the original Sophie, now 1-year-old, was crying in her crib, hungry for her morning bottle. Miguel was already up, getting ready for work, with no memory of the previous night's hospital visit. Elena checked her body frantically. No signs of recent childbirth, no soreness, no bleeding, no physical evidence that she had just given birth to a second child. But the memory was crystal clear, more vivid than most of her waking experiences. She could still feel the weight of the baby on her chest, still smell that distinctive newborn scent, still remember the exact pattern of her daughter's cry. At first, Elena convinced herself it had been an incredibly realistic dream, brought on by the anniversary of Sophie's birth. New mothers often had vivid dreams about their children, and the human mind was capable of creating experiences that felt completely real during sleep. But when March 15, 2021 arrived, Elena woke up in active labor again. This time she was prepared. She had spent the year documenting everything, keeping detailed journals, setting up cameras, even convincing Miguel to stay awake with her on the night of March 14th, to witness whatever was happening to her. The contractions started at exactly 2:15 p.m. Miguel, who had been skeptical but loving about Elena's insistence that something supernatural was happening to her, watched in shock as his wife's body exhibited all the signs of active labor despite having shown no signs of pregnancy. "How is this possible?" he whispered, timing the contractions that were coming with increasing frequency and intensity. "I don't know," Elena gasped between waves of pain that were absolutely undeniably real, "but it's happening again." This time, instead of going to the hospital, they decided to stay home and document everything. Miguel set up video cameras, Elena wore a heart rate monitor, and they called Elena's sister Maria, a registered nurse, to come and witness whatever was occurring. Maria arrived to find Elena in the final stages of labor, her body exhibiting all the physical signs of impending birth, despite the medical impossibility of the situation. This is real," Maria whispered, her professional training warring with the evidence before her eyes. "She's really giving birth. But to what?" At 3:47 a.m., Elena gave birth to Sophie for the third time. The baby was perfect, identical to the Sophie who was now sleeping peacefully in her room down the hall. This Sophie cried with the same voice, had the same tiny birthmark on her left shoulder, even had the same slightly crooked little toe that had made Elena laugh during those first precious days of motherhood. But this time they were all watching when it happened. The moment Elena's exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she began to drift towards sleep, the baby in her arms began to fade like morning mist. Within seconds she was holding nothing but empty blankets, and all the physical evidence of the birth mess, the medical supplies Maria had brought, even the recordings on Miguel's cameras, had vanished as if they had never existed. Only the three adults retained any memory of what had occurred.
"What the hell is happening to my wife?"
Miguel demanded, his voice shaking with fear and confusion. Elena stared at the empty blankets in her arms, feeling a grief so profound it threatened to tear her apart. She had given birth to her daughter, held her, loved her with every fiber of her being, and then watched her disappear into nothingness. It was a loss that felt more real than most of the tangible experiences in her life. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep losing her every year." The fourth year, Elena tried everything she could think of to avoid the experience. She and Miguel traveled to Japan, hoping that being in a different time zone might disrupt whatever force was compelling her body to repeat Sophie's birth. She tried staying awake for the entire 24-hour period, medicating herself to prevent sleep, even checking herself into a psychiatric facility where she could be monitored by medical professionals. Nothing worked. At 2:15 p.m. Japan time, which corresponded exactly to 2:15 p.m. in their home time zone the day before, Elena went into labor in her hotel room in Tokyo. The Japanese doctors who were called to assist her spoke in rapid, concerned voices as they tried to understand how a woman with no signs of pregnancy could be giving birth to a fully formed child. Miguel held her hand as she labored in a foreign hospital, surrounded by people speaking a language they didn't understand, watching his wife endure something that should have been impossible. And at exactly 3:47 a.m. local time, which was precisely 3:47 a.m. in their hometown, Elena gave birth to Sophie once again. This time, Miguel tried to keep the baby from disappearing. He held Sophie himself as Elena fell asleep, fighting his own exhaustion, determined to understand what happened when the child vanished. But despite his vigilance, the moment he blinked just for a fraction of a second, the baby was gone, leaving him holding nothing but the echo of her warmth. "We need help," Miguel said when they returned home to find their real Sophie, now 3 years old, playing happily with her toys, completely oblivious to the impossible siblings she had been gaining and losing each year. "This isn't something we can figure out on our own." Elena's search for answers led her into the strangest corners of medical research, quantum physics, and paranormal investigation. She contacted researchers studying temporal anomalies, doctors specializing in impossible pregnancies, and theoretical physicists working on the nature of time and consciousness. Most dismissed her story as psychological trauma or an elaborate hoax, but Dr. Sarah Chen, a quantum physicist at MIT who had been studying temporal consciousness phenomena, agreed to investigate Elena's case. "What you're describing," Dr. Chen told Elena during their first video conference, "sounds like what we call a temporal echo minus an event, so significant that it creates ripples in space-time, causing it to repeat under specific conditions." Dr. Chen explained that in quantum physics, highly emotional or traumatic events could theoretically create what she called probability anchors, Midas points in space-time where the intense focus of consciousness might cause certain events to replay like a broken record. "Childbirth is one of the most intense experiences human consciousness can have," Dr. Chen continued. "The combination of physical trauma, emotional overwhelm, and the creation of new life generates enormous psychological energy. In rare cases, this energy might be enough to create a temporal loop." But why was this happening to Elena specifically? Dr. Chen's research suggested that some individuals might be naturally sensitive to quantum fluctuations, making them more likely to experience temporal anomalies. "Have you ever experienced other unusual phenomena?" Dr. Chen asked. "Precognitive dreams, feelings of déjà vu, experiences that seem to repeat or exist outside normal time?" Elena considered the question carefully. Now that she thought about it, she had always been unusually sensitive to changes in her environment. She could often sense when someone was going to call before the phone rang. She frequently had dreams that came true in small ways. And since childhood, she had occasionally experienced moments that felt like they were happening for the second time, as if she were living the same moment twice. "I think I've always been different," Elena admitted. But I never thought it was connected to anything like this. Dr. Chen's investigation of Elena's case led to a startling discovery. Through careful analysis of Elena's medical records, family history, and psychological profile, Dr. Chen found that Elena exhibited several markers associated with what she called temporal sensitivity syndrome, a theoretical condition where an individual's consciousness could interact with quantum probability fields in unusual ways. But the most significant breakthrough came when Dr. Chen realized that Elena's annual birth experience wasn't just a repetition, it was an opportunity. What if Dr. Chen proposed, the universe is giving you a chance to understand something about the nature of motherhood, love and loss that can only be learned through this experience? What if Sophie Ni, the Sophie who disappears each year, is trying to teach you something? The idea that her mysterious annual daughter might have purpose beyond Elena's understanding changed everything about how she approached the experience. Instead of trying to avoid or stop the yearly birth, Elena decided to embrace it and try to communicate with the Sophie who appeared only to vanish. The 5th year, Elena prepared differently. She studied meditation, learned techniques for maintaining consciousness during extreme physical stress, and practiced staying present and aware during intense emotional experiences. When the contractions started on March 14th at 2:15 p.m., Elena breathed through them with newfound calm. When labor intensified, she focused not on the pain but on the miracle that was occurring. And when Sophie was born at 3:47 a.m., Elena looked into her daughter's eyes with complete presence and spoke to her. "Who are you?" Elena whispered to the baby in her arms. "What are you trying to tell me?" For the first time, the vanishing Sophie seemed to respond. The baby's eyes focused on Elena's face with an intensity that seemed impossible for a newborn, and in that gaze, Elena saw something that made her heart stop. She saw herself. Not her physical features, but her essence, and her consciousness, her soul, her deepest self reflected back at her through her daughter's eyes. And in that moment of recognition, Elena understood. The Sophie who appeared each year wasn't a separate being. She was Elena herself, manifesting through the birth experience to teach Elena something crucial about the nature of love, motherhood, and the connection between parent and child. "You're me," Elena whispered to the baby. "You're showing me what I need to learn." The baby Sicho, Elena's own consciousness in infant form, seemed to smile, and then for the first time she spoke. "Every time you give birth to me, you give birth to a deeper understanding of love," the baby said in a voice that was Elena's own voice, young and ancient at the same time. "Each year you learn to love more completely, more unconditionally, more fearlessly. I appear to teach you that love is not about possession or permanence. Love is about the willingness to experience the fullest depth of connection, even knowing that all things must pass." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she understood. The annual birth wasn't a curse or an anomaly, it was a gift. Each year she was being given the opportunity to experience the purest form of love known to humanity, the love between mother and child, without the complications of daily life, without the gradual numbing that comes with familiarity. "But why does it hurt so much when you disappear?" Elena asked. "Because," the baby replied, "loss is the price of love. And the willingness to love completely, despite knowing that loss is inevitable, is the greatest courage humans can possess. Each year you choose to love me fully, knowing I will disappear. That choice makes you more capable of loving everyone in your life, including Sophie, your real daughter, with greater depth and presence." As Elena held this impossible conversation with her temporal daughter, she realized that the experience had indeed changed her relationship with the Sophie who existed in normal time. Each year, as she endured the loss of the disappearing Sophie, she had become more present, more grateful, more intensely connected to her real daughter's daily existence. "Will this continue forever?" Elena asked. "Until you no longer need the lesson," the baby replied. "Until you can love without fear, live without the illusion of permanence, and find joy in the temporary nature of all beautiful things." Elena nodded, understanding filling her like warm light. I think I'm ready." The baby smiled again. And this time when she began to fade, Elena didn't feel grief. Instead she felt profound gratitude for the gift she had been given, the opportunity to learn the deepest secrets of love through the most intense experience human consciousness could provide. When Elena woke up in her own bed that morning, Sophie doll, her real, three-dimensional permanent Sophie, was calling for her from the next room. Elena went to her daughter with a heart so full of love it felt like it might burst.
"Mama!"
Sophie cried, reaching up to be held. "I missed you." Elena lifted her daughter into her arms, feeling the solid reality of her warm body, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, marveling at the miracle of this little person who had grown from the same love that created the disappearing Sophie each year. "I missed you too, baby," Elena whispered, "more than you could ever know." But as March 15, 2025 approached, Elena found herself wondering if the yearly birth would continue. Had she learned what she needed to learn? Or was there more wisdom waiting for her in that impossible space between birth and loss, between having and letting go? The contractions started at 2:15 p.m., just as they had for the past 5 years. But this time Elena wasn't afraid. She was curious, open, ready to receive whatever gift the universe was preparing to give her. Miguel held her hand as they made their way to the hospital. They had decided to return to the place where the first birth had occurred, feeling that it was important to honor the full cycle of the experience. "Are you ready for this?" Miguel asked as another contraction peaked. "I think so," Elena said. "I think I finally understand what's been happening to us." The labor proceeded exactly as it always had, but Elena's experience of it was completely different. Instead of fighting the pain, she breathed with it. Instead of fearing the outcome, she embraced the mystery. And instead of dreading the moment when the baby would disappear, she prepared to receive whatever wisdom this final birth would bring. At 3:47 a.m. on March 15, 2025, Elena gave birth to Sophie for the 6th time. But this Sophie was different. When the doctor placed her on Elena's chest, the baby looked up at her mother with eyes that held not just love but profound recognition and gratitude. "Thank you," the baby whispered, "for learning to love without condition, without fear, without the need to possess. You have mastered the greatest lesson consciousness can learn. Now you can teach it to others." Elena felt a warm glow spreading through her chest as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just about her own growth, it was about her role in helping others learn the same lessons about love, loss, and the courage to remain open despite the inevitable pain of living. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now," the baby said, "you live, you love, you teach others through your example what it means to embrace the temporary nature of all beautiful things, and you help other mothers who might be experiencing their own impossible journeys through the mystery of love." As the baby began to fade for the final time, Elena felt not loss but completion. She had been transformed by this annual pilgrimage through birth and disappearance, shaped into someone capable of loving more deeply and living more fully than she had ever imagined possible. When Elena opened her eyes in her own bed the next morning, she knew immediately that the cycle had ended. There was a sense of completion, of having graduated from some cosmic curriculum in the nature of love. Sophie, real, permanent, wonderful Sophie was already awake, playing quietly in her room. When Elena went to her, she found her daughter building an elaborate tower with blocks, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "Mama, look," Sophie said proudly, showing off her architectural achievement. "I made it all by myself." Elena knelt down beside her daughter, marveling at the complexity of the structure Sophie had created. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so creative and capable." As she watched Sophie add another block to the tower, Elena felt a profound shift in her awareness. She could see not just her daughter as she was in this moment, but all the versions of Sophie that would exist throughout her life, the teenager she would become, the young woman finding her way in the world, the adult she would grow into, and eventually the older woman she might become. All of these Sophies existed simultaneously in Elena's expanded consciousness, and she loved them all equally, completely, without the desperate need to freeze any moment in time or prevent the natural flow of growth and change that would transform her daughter throughout her life. Elena realized that the yearly births had been preparing her for this mise, the ability to love someone fully, while accepting the constant transformation that defines all life. She could now be present with Sophie as she was in each moment, while simultaneously holding space for all the people Sophie would become. But the most profound change was in Elena's relationship with impermanence itself. Where she had once feared loss and change, she now saw them as essential aspects of love's deepest expression. The yearly disappearance of the temporal Sophie had taught her that the willingness to love something that will inevitably change or be lost was not a weakness, but the highest form of courage. Elena began sharing her story, first with close friends and family, then with other mothers who reached out to her through online communities dedicated to unusual parenting experiences. She discovered that while her specific experience was unique, the underlying struggle, learning to love fully while accepting impermanence, was universal. Many mothers contacted her describing their own impossible experiences, dreams of children they had never had, but felt they knew intimately, encounters with phantom babies and quiet moments, or overwhelming feelings of loss for potential children who existed only in possibility. Elena created a support group for women experiencing what she called temporal motherhood. She taught them the lessons she had learned through her annual births, that love is not diminished by impermanence but intensified by it, that the willingness to feel loss is the price of feeling deep connection, and that embracing the temporary nature of all relationships allows for more complete presence and gratitude. Dr. Chen continued to study Elena's case, and the cases of other women who contacted her through Elena's support group. Her research suggested that Elena's experience might represent an emerging form of human consciousness, an awareness that could perceive and interact with multiple probability states simultaneously. What Elena experienced, Dr. Chen explained in her published research, may be an example of how human consciousness is evolving to embrace quantum realities. Instead of being limited to linear single-timeline awareness, some individuals are developing the capacity to experience multiple potential realities simultaneously. But for Elena, the scientific explanations mattered less than the practical wisdom she had gained. She had learned to be a better mother, a more present wife, and a more open human being. The annual births had been a curriculum in the deepest aspects of love, taught through the most intense experience human consciousness could provide. Years later, when Sophie was a teenager, Elena told her daughter the full story of the yearly births. Sophie listened with wide eyes, sometimes laughing, sometimes near tears, as Elena described the impossible experiences that had shaped her understanding of motherhood. "So I have a sister who only exists one day a year?" Sophie asked when Elena finished the story. "You have a sister who exists in the space between possibility and reality," Elena corrected gently. "She taught me how to love you more completely than I ever could have without her." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then she said, "I think I've always felt her somehow, like there was another version of myself somewhere, watching over us." Elena smiled, understanding that her daughter's sensitivity to the quantum aspects of existence might be part of her inheritance, not a burden but a gift that would allow her to experience life with expanded awareness and deeper connection. As the years passed, Elena occasionally wondered if the yearly births would return. Sometimes on March 14th, she would feel a flutter of anticipation, a sense that something significant might be approaching, but the temporal Sophie never appeared again in physical form. Instead, Elena began to understand that the Sophie who had been born and disappeared each year lived on in a different way. In Elena's expanded capacity for love, in her ability to be present with impermanence, and in the wisdom she shared with other mothers struggling to understand the mysterious depths of parental love. The woman who had once feared the yearly loss of an impossible child had become someone who could help others navigate the complex terrain of loving completely while accepting the temporary nature of all relationships. She had learned that the greatest motherhood lesson wasn't about protecting or possessing, but about loving so fully that even inevitable loss became a sacred part of the experience. Elena's story spread beyond the support groups and research papers, inspiring people who had never experienced anything supernatural to reconsider their own relationships with love and loss. Her message was simple but profound. The willingness to love completely, despite knowing that all things must change and pass away, is the highest expression of human consciousness. And sometimes, late at night when she was checking on Sophie before bed, Elena would feel a presence in the room, not threatening or sad, but peaceful and grateful. In those moments, she knew that the temporal Sophie was still with them in some way, not as a separate being, but as the living embodiment of love's triumph over the fear of loss. The mother who had given birth to the same child every year had ultimately given birth to something even more precious, a way of being in the world that embraced the full spectrum of human experience, from the ecstasy of connection to the sorrow of separation, understanding that both were necessary aspects of love's complete expression. Elena had learned the ultimate lesson of motherhood, that the depth of love is measured not by how long we can hold on to something, but by how completely we can love it while it's here, and how gracefully we can let it go when it's time for it to transform into something new. But Elena's story was far from over. The profound transformation she had undergone through her yearly encounters with the temporal Sophie would soon ripple outward in ways she never could have anticipated, touching lives around the world and ultimately revealing that her experience was part of something much larger than one woman's journey through impossible motherhood. 3 years after the final birth, Elena received a letter that would change everything she thought she understood about her experience. The letter came from Dr. Maria Santos, a researcher at the Institute for Consciousness Studies in Brazil, and its contents made Elena's hand shake as she read. "Dear Mrs. Rodriguez," the letter began, "I hope this reaches you safely. I am writing because your story, which has circulated through certain academic and spiritual communities, bears striking similarities to cases I have been documenting for the past decade. I believe you may be part of a phenomenon far more widespread and significant than anyone has yet realized." Dr. Santos went on to describe her research into what she called cyclical consciousness events, recurring supernatural experiences that seem to be increasing in frequency around the world. She had documented cases from 6 continents of individuals who experienced impossible repetitions of significant life events. "There is a woman in Norway," Dr. Santos wrote, "who attends her father's funeral every year on the anniversary of his death, though he died 15 years ago. A man in Japan who graduates from university annually, receiving the same diploma from professors who remember giving it to him multiple times, but cannot explain why he keeps returning. A child in Kenya who celebrates the same birthday party repeatedly, with the same guests bringing the same gifts, though she ages normally between celebrations. Elena felt a chill of recognition reading these descriptions. The temporal patterns, the significance of anniversary dates, the perfect repetition of emotionally charged events, all of it echoed her own experience with Sophie's yearly birth. Dr. Santos's letter continued. What troubles me most about these cases is not just their impossibility, but their apparent purpose. Every individual I have studied reports profound personal transformation through their cyclical experiences. They emerge as more compassionate, more spiritually aware, more capable of love and wisdom than before their cycles began. It is as if consciousness itself is being educated through these impossible experiences. The letter concluded with an invitation that would change the course of Elena's life. I am organizing a conference in São Paulo for individuals who have experienced these phenomena, along with researchers from various fields who are studying them. Would you consider joining us? I believe that understanding what is happening to people like you may be crucial to understanding the next stage of human evolution. Elena showed the letter to Miguel, who had been her steadfast companion through every impossible birth, and had witnessed firsthand the profound changes in his wife's capacity for love and presence. Do you want to go? He asked, though she could see in his eyes that he already knew her answer. I have to, Elena replied. If there are others experiencing these things, if there's a larger pattern, I need to understand what this is all about. 2 months later, Elena found herself in a conference room in São Paulo, surrounded by 37 individuals who had each experienced some form of cyclical supernatural event. The diversity of the group was striking and they came from different countries, cultures, ages and backgrounds, yet they all shared a certain quality that Elena recognized immediately, a depth of presence, a quality of attention, and an openness to mystery that seemed to radiate from people who had been fundamentally transformed by impossible experiences. Dr. Santos opened the conference by sharing her research findings. What we are witnessing, she announced, appears to be a global consciousness phenomenon. The cyclical events you have each experienced are not random anomalies. They follow distinct patterns, they serve specific purposes, and they are increasing in frequency worldwide. She presented data showing that reports of cyclical consciousness events had increased by 400% over the past decade, with the most dramatic spike occurring in the last 3 years. Something is changing in human consciousness, Dr. Santos continued. These experiences appear to be a form of accelerated spiritual education, compressing lifetimes of wisdom into repeated encounters with transformative events. Elena listened in fascination as other participants shared their stories. There was James, a British man who relived his wedding day annually, each repetition teaching him deeper layers of commitment and love until he understood marriage not as a single event but as a daily choice to see his partner with fresh eyes. Maria, an Italian woman who experienced her mother's death repeatedly, each cycle healing another layer of grief until she could hold both profound sadness and profound gratitude simultaneously. Each story revealed the same pattern Elena had discovered in her own experience: initial terror and confusion, gradual acceptance and exploration, and ultimately, transformation into someone capable of deeper love, greater wisdom, and more complete presence. But it was Dr. Chen's presentation that provided the most startling revelation. She had been studying the quantum consciousness aspects of these phenomena, and had made a discovery that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. These cyclical events are not happening to random individuals, Dr. Chen announced. Every person in this room shows specific neurological markers that suggest enhanced connectivity between brain regions associated with consciousness, empathy, and quantum field sensitivity. You are not experiencing these things by accident. You have been selected. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as Dr. Chen continued. Our measurements suggest that individuals experiencing cyclical consciousness events are developing capabilities that may represent the next stage of human evolution. Enhanced empathy, expanded awareness, the ability to perceive and interact with multiple probability states simultaneously. You are not just learning personal lessons, you are developing new capacities for consciousness itself. Elena raised her hand tentatively. Selected by whom, and for what purpose? Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. That's the question that keeps me awake at night. The selection process appears to be guided by some form of intelligence, but whether it's cosmic, technological, or emerging from consciousness itself, we simply don't know. What we do know is that every individual who completes their cyclical experience emerges with enhanced capabilities for healing, teaching, and facilitating transformation in others. As the conference continued over the following days, Elena began to understand that her experience with the temporal Sophie had been preparation for something much larger. She wasn't just a mother who had learned to love more deeply, she was part of a network of individuals being prepared to help humanity navigate a fundamental shift in consciousness. The connections she formed with other participants were unlike any relationships she had experienced. There was an immediate recognition, a sense of being part of the same cosmic curriculum, even though their individual experiences had been completely different. They could communicate on levels that transcended normal conversation, sharing insights and understandings that seemed to flow directly between consciousness without the need for words. Elena was particularly drawn to David, a former surgeon from Canada who had experienced cyclical death and resurrection events that had taught him to work with healing energies that couldn't be measured by conventional medicine. His patients experienced recovery rates that defied medical explanation, and he had begun training other healthcare workers in techniques that seemed to accelerate healing through consciousness-based interventions. What I learned, David explained to Elena during one of their long conversations, is that the cyclical experiences aren't just about personal transformation, they're about developing capabilities that humanity will need to navigate the challenges ahead. The planet is facing crises that can't be solved through traditional approaches. We need people who can think beyond linear cause and effect, who can work with energies and consciousness in ways that our current scientific paradigm doesn't recognize. Elena found herself nodding in recognition. Since her final birth experience with Sophie, she had noticed that her presence seemed to have healing effects on other people. Mothers who spent time with her found themselves more patient with their children, more present in their relationships, more capable of navigating the challenges of parenthood with grace and wisdom. I think, Elena said slowly, we're being prepared to teach others what we've learned, not through words or theories, but through presence, through becoming living examples of what consciousness can become when it's willing to embrace the full spectrum of experience. The conference culminated in an experience that none of the participants would ever forget. Dr. Santos had arranged for the group to participate in a collective meditation designed to explore whether their enhanced consciousness could interact in measurable ways. As the 37 individuals sat in silence together, something extraordinary began to happen. Elena felt her awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual consciousness, connecting with the minds and hearts of everyone in the room. She could sense not just their current thoughts and feelings, but the essence of their cyclical experiences, the wisdom they had gained, and the love they had developed through their impossible journeys. But more than that, she began to perceive something vast and intelligent, guiding the process, not a separate entity, but an aspect of consciousness itself that was orchestrating these experiences, for reasons that transcended individual benefit. In that expanded state, Elena understood that the cyclical experiences were part of a larger consciousness evolution occurring throughout humanity. The individuals in this room were early adopters, pioneers who were developing new capacities that would eventually become available to everyone. The repeated birth of the temporal Sophie hadn't just been about teaching Elena to love more deeply, it had been about preparing her to help guide humanity through a transition from consciousness based on separation and control, to consciousness based on love and interconnection. When the meditation ended, the room was filled with a palpable sense of purpose and connection. Elena looked around at the faces of her fellow travelers, and saw not just individuals who had experienced impossible things, but a community of consciousness pioneers who had been prepared to serve humanity's evolution. "What happens now?" asked Maria, the Italian woman who had experienced her mother's death repeatedly. Dr. Santos smiled. "Now you go back to your lives and your communities, but you go back changed. You carry within you new capacities for consciousness, and those capacities will naturally influence everyone you encounter. You don't need to preach or teach in traditional ways. Your very presence will begin to activate similar potentials in others." Elena returned home to Chicago with a profound sense of mission. She understood now that her support group for mothers experiencing temporal parenting was just the beginning. She was meant to help facilitate the broader consciousness shift that was occurring throughout humanity. Working with Dr. Chen and Dr. Santos, Elena began developing what they called consciousness integration programs, methods for helping people develop enhanced empathy, expanded awareness, and the ability to work with non-linear aspects of reality. The programs didn't require people to have supernatural experiences like Elena's. Instead, they used meditation, movement, and group interaction techniques to help individuals access expanded states of consciousness that revealed their deeper connections to each other and to the larger patterns of existence. The results were remarkable. Participants reported increased creativity, enhanced intuitive abilities, and most significantly, a natural tendency toward more compassionate and sustainable ways of living. They made different choices about relationships, work, and their relationship with the environment, choices that seemed to emerge from a deeper understanding of interconnection, rather than from intellectual concepts about what they should do. Elena's work attracted attention from educators, therapists, and organizations around the world who were looking for ways to address the increasing mental health challenges and social fragmentation that seemed to be affecting human communities globally. But the most profound validation of Elena's work came from an unexpected source: Sophie herself. Now a teenager, Sophie had grown into someone who seemed to naturally embody the expanded consciousness that Elena had worked so hard to develop. She showed remarkable empathy for others, an intuitive understanding of complex emotional situations, and a natural ability to help her peers navigate the challenges of adolescence with greater wisdom and compassion than seemed typical for her age. "Mom," Sophie said one evening as they were preparing dinner together, "I've been thinking about the story you told me about the other Sophie, the one who was born every year." Elena looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, always interested in her daughter's perspectives on the impossible experiences that had shaped their family. "I think I understand now why it happened," Sophie continued. "It wasn't really about teaching you to be a better mother to me, though that was part of it. It was about teaching you to love in a way that could help heal the world." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes at the wisdom in her daughter's words. "What do you mean?" "The way you love me now, completely present, without trying to control who I become, able to celebrate who I am in each moment, while knowing I'll keep changing. That's how everyone needs to learn to love. Not just parents with children, but people with partners, communities with members, humans with the planet." Sophie paused, looking thoughtful. "I think the other Sophie appeared to teach you something that you needed to know so you could teach it to others. And I think I'm supposed to learn it too, but in a different way." Elena put down her knife and turned to face her daughter fully. "What do you mean?" I mean, I think I'm part of this too. Not the same way you were, but in my own way. I can feel things other people feel. I know things I shouldn't know, and I have dreams that seem to show me things that haven't happened yet, but feel like they're going to." Elena felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. She had wondered if Sophie might inherit some version of her enhanced consciousness, but she had hoped her daughter could live a more normal life. "Are you afraid?" Elena asked gently. Sophie considered the question seriously. "No, not afraid. Excited, I think. Like I'm part of something important that's happening to lots of people, something that could help make things better." That night, Elena called Dr. Santos to discuss what Sophie had shared. "I've been wondering about this," Dr. Santos replied. "Several of our conference participants have children who are showing enhanced consciousness abilities. It appears that the cyclical experiences don't just transform the individuals who have them, they create a kind of consciousness field that influences the next generation." "What does that mean for Sophie's future?" Elena asked. "It means she's part of the second wave," Dr. Santos explained. "The children of consciousness pioneers like yourself seem to be developing abilities naturally that required intense cyclical experiences for your generation to develop. They may be the bridge between current human consciousness and whatever we're evolving toward." Over the following months, Elena watched with amazement as Sophie began to naturally demonstrate abilities that Elena had worked years to develop. Sophie could sense the emotional states of her classmates and knew intuitively how to help them through difficult periods. She had dreams that provided guidance for friends facing important decisions. Most remarkably, her presence seemed to have a calming, clarifying effect on group dynamics, helping people communicate more honestly and resolve conflicts more easily. Elena began incorporating Sophie into her consciousness work, not as a subject or student but as a colleague who brought different gifts to the process of helping others develop expanded awareness. The mother-daughter team attracted the attention of researchers studying the inheritance of consciousness abilities, and their work together became a model for how enhanced consciousness could be passed between generations and integrated into daily life. But perhaps the most significant development came when Elena received a letter from a woman in Australia who had read about her story online. "Dear Elena," the letter began, "my name is Catherine Wells, and I believe my daughter may be experiencing something similar to your temporal Sophie but in reverse. Instead of giving birth to the same child repeatedly, she seems to be living the same day of her childhood over and over again, but as an adult watching herself as a child. I'm hoping you might have insights that could help us understand what's happening." Elena realized that the cyclical consciousness phenomenon was continuing to evolve and manifest in new ways. Her experience with the temporal Sophie had been just one variation of a much larger pattern of consciousness evolution that was continuing to unfold. Working with Dr. Santos, Dr. Chen, and the global network of consciousness researchers and experiencers, Elena began documenting these new variations and developing support systems for individuals and families who were encountering them. The work revealed that cyclical consciousness events were becoming more varied and sophisticated, suggesting that whatever intelligence was guiding the process was adapting its methods to meet the specific needs of different individuals and situations. Elena's support network expanded from a small group of mothers to an international community of people experiencing various forms of consciousness expansion and the families who loved them. The network provided not just emotional support, but practical guidance for integrating enhanced consciousness abilities into daily life in ways that benefited both the individuals involved and their communities. Years later, when researchers look back on this period of human history, they would identify Elena's experience with the temporal Sophie as one of the early indicators of a consciousness revolution that transformed how humanity understood love, connection, and the nature of existence itself. But for Elena, the most important legacy of her impossible journey was simpler and more personal. She had learned to love without conditions, to be present without attachment, and to embrace the temporary nature of all beautiful things as the very quality that made them precious. The woman who had once feared the yearly disappearance of an impossible child had become someone who could help others discover that the willingness to love completely, despite the inevitability of change and loss, was not just the highest expression of human consciousness, it was the key to unlocking humanity's next stage of evolution. Elena's story continued to unfold, not through dramatic supernatural events, but through the quiet daily practice of loving with the depth and wisdom she had gained through her encounters with the temporal Sophie. And in that practice she found something more miraculous than any impossible birth, the discovery that every moment of ordinary life contained infinite possibilities for love, growth, and connection when approached with the consciousness she had developed through her extraordinary experiences. The mother who had given birth to the same child every year had ultimately given birth to a new way of being human, one that would ripple through generations, inspiring others to embrace the full spectrum of love's expression and helping humanity navigate its transition into expanded consciousness with grace, wisdom, and an open heart.